Welcome to the Music Education Podcast. I'm Chris of the Chris Woods Groove Orchestra, and this podcast is brought to you by the Soundstorm Music Education Hub. In this episode, I chat to Adam Ironside. Adam is an out-of-this-world musician, and in this conversation we focus in on his playing of the fretless guitar. Now, it's not a guitar conversation per se, but we use it as a vehicle to get really stuck into the idea of notes between notes. Ultimately, the conversation will help challenge and change your perspective of music and sound itself, and perhaps how you can present that to your students. I hope you enjoy listening. So my understanding, and I reckon everyone's understanding of tuning, is even or equal temperament. Is that those two terms get? Do I just mix those up, or is that sort of fair to say? Or
yeah, it's fair to say. I mean, I think the whole conversation should have a massive caveat at the beginning of I am not an expert in any of this stuff whatsoever. I think that
I'm totally cutting that out, Adam.
I think that's very important to leave in at the beginning of the conversation. Like, I have dabbled, and I did a little bit at university and had a few lecturers who, again, had dabbled. Like, I have never come across anyone who has really immersed themselves into this world in the small city of Sunderland in the northeast of England. That probably isn't a major surprise. But yes, I prefer to, I think it's an Americanized term, but I prefer to call it like equal divisions of octave. So sort of standard tuning, if you like, standard equal temperament. I prefer to think of it as 12 equal divisions of the octave, because that, for whatever reason, that language made a bit more sense to me when it was explained to us. So, we take a standard octave, we equally divide it mathematically by 12, and that gives us our sort of standard even temperament.
Mm-hmm. But then as we go further beyond one octave, right, that becomes then problematic, doesn't it, in those normal divisions, right? And then we start to sort of mess with it to make it sort of fit for our ears. Is that correct?
So it depends. So most in inverted commas, let's say, are instrument, like let's take a piano, right? It's tuned most of the time equal throughout. So it's exactly, A440 is divided by 2 becomes A220, is divided by 2 becomes A110. As you move further out of that octave, as you said, Chris, it becomes more and more less in tune. So it becomes less and less in tune. And so piano tuners and instrument tuners and players of fretless instruments have experimented with stretched tuning, where certain notes or certain pitches are tuned higher or lower than others. Also within certain keys, and especially on guitar as well, guitar makes it very difficult. Within certain keys, certain notes are actually technically, musically, really out of tune. And so some players on some instruments, it's a lot easier to do with synths, where you can play around with this stuff. They fine-tune each note so that it's harmonically in tune rather than, mathematically just taking the number of cycles.
Because that seems... when I talk about music theory with people, there's always this... I always try and put a caveat in of understanding that the theoretical ideas are explaining something that works rather than being the thing. It's like trying to explain the beauty of a flower, but it's like, here's some maths that explains it, but the flower was there first, which is shocking sometimes to some people. But that's easy for me because I came from like theory later, whereas some people access all that theory afterwards, right?
Yeah, that's exactly it. I mean, it's a mathematical equation to make music as uniform, pitches as uniform as possible, to make it mathematically easy to digest and, of course, easy to tune. Because if you said, right, 2 octaves up, you need to tune the C, ever so slightly lower, and then that C sharp needs to be ever so slightly higher, then a piano tuner's job or whatever, especially before digital tools, even analog tuning tools would have been incredibly difficult, and every instrument would have been tuned very differently. So it's really a standardization, I suppose. Like anything else, whenever you standardize something, certain nuances kind of get lost a little bit along the way. But I think it's probably for the greater good.
Because stuff sounds in tune. But that whole concept goes out the window, doesn't it, when you play, well, some of the stuff that you introduced me to that is beautifully out of tune, essentially, is how I would describe it. I don't even want to say out of tune, because it's obviously not out of tune, suggests wrong, doesn't it? But what's happening in that music that I'm talking about?
Good question, Chris. I've tried to explore this and find out more. So I think what I introduced you to particularly was the music of a Russian composer, Ivan Vishnegradsky. I have no idea if that's how you pronounce his name. I've seen it spelled 5 or 6 different ways. And he was one of the first major sort of Western composers to really experiment and analyze with quarter-tonal and microtonal music. So it seems really obvious once you've explained it, but until now, I know that a lot of people will have never thought about it because I hadn't. But believe it or not, there are notes that exist between the notes. So when people say, you know, that there's no note between B and C, absolutely there are. There are millions of them. Some of them are just a little bit more difficult to play than others. But what Ivan Vishnegradsky did was he took music from the Eastern world, music theory from sort of the Arabic world, where microtonality, as we call it, is very, very, what's the word I'm looking for? Ingrained in that musical culture. Very, very popular. Still is to this day. Always has been, as long as their music has existed. And what Ivan did was try to, with the work of some others as well, was try to standardize microtonal music and compare and contrast it to traditional sort of 12-note Western European harmony. And he definitely made some progress with him. He was the first composer that I accidentally somehow stumbled on a late night YouTube binge, and probably had one beer too many and was like, "Whoa, what's going on here?"
Something wrong with my ears.
Yeah. This what's happened to the computer? Adjusting all the settings, and then after about 30 seconds, you're like, "Oh, this is making us feel really interesting. I can't say I'm happy or sad, or I don't find it funny, or it's a really interesting new sound world." Anyway, we'll get there. So what he did, he wrote a manual on quarter tone harmony, where he mathematically analysed, using traditional Western music theory, how to use all of these new quarter tones. So that would now double the amount of notes that you have on the piano or on any instrument, from 12 notes per octave to 24. Now, I think it's really important to mention that, again, this 24 equal divisions of octave is a little bit of a bastardization, I suppose, of this Arabic and Eastern music theory, because in reality, most of the music that I've discovered, they don't play perfect quarter tones. Certain countries or certain genres of music or certain peoples might be, we actually play it 10 cents sharper, or we play it 8 cents flatter. And sometimes it depends whether you're going up or down melodically as well. A little bit like how our melodic minor scale changes depending on the direction of travel. A lot of the Arabic...
Is this partly due to him playing it on piano as well, because of the sort of on and off facility, rather than on a fretless instrument or pulling on a string?
Yeah, obviously very, very difficult on piano. Piano was his main instrument, I believe. And the first music that I'm aware of that was written for quarter tone piano was actually written for 2 piano players. One piano would be tuned quarter sharp or quarter flat. And so both piano players would play in tandem. And then he, I don't know if he invented or if it already existed, but there's a few really grainy black and white photos out there of Ivan playing a true quarter tone piano, which is kind of like, looks like it has like sort of 3 or 4 keyboards, a little bit like an organ, and each one tuned a quarter tone apart, and it's a really bizarre, interesting instrument. Okay. And then, of course, further down the rabbit hole, perhaps beyond the realms of this discussion, he would then write music for 8 pianos that were tuned like an eighth apart, so you get super sort of microtonality.
Wow.
But yes, to answer your question, it would again be very, very difficult to explain using Western theory. Well, this nation, so the Iraqi people play the note this way, the Tunisian people play the note this way. It's all based around similar kind of systems, but the sort of musical, cultural differences have brought about those different nuances in pitch and how those notes are kind of played.
Yeah. And I guess also quite often being like an oral tradition rather than a notated tradition. So actually,
absolutely,
we don't really know where that note was. And that's so interesting in the feeling of what the music brings about, because anything that sounds sort of slightly atonal always creates this sense of, or to me, and I think usually most people on the first hearing, it's like foreboding and
yeah.
And it gets used in cinema in that way, doesn't it? In Western cinema to be dun 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 dun. Even when it's not aggressive, if it's discordant.
Mm-hmm. But
it sort of just takes a bit of time, doesn't it? Sort of tuning into it, and you can see how that how perception of beauty, even maybe. Or that definitely linking to emotions of not even happy and sad, but all those complex colours in between can be really cultural affairs because of how you've sort of been listened to that and because it does take time, doesn't it? You tune in, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like anything, I remember when I first started playing guitar, and to be fair, still to this day, just wanted to tune the low string down as low as possible and just hit it repeatedly for 5 minutes at a time while a friend shouts into a microphone. And I still do that nearly every single day of my life. That's what it's all about. So I remember
that's why I get up in the morning. That's great.
Absolutely. Bit of death metal, absolutely still playing a metal band, and despite exploring all of this stuff, that's still where my heart is, or lack of heart, I suppose. But yes, you're exactly right. So like anything, I remember when I first discovered, Alan Holdsworth, phenomenal electric guitar player, now one of my favorite players, one of the greatest musicians that's ever lived. When I first heard it, I was, nah, that's garbage. It's just chromaticism for the sake of chromaticism. But then as you start to sort of learn a bit more about music and expose yourself to various genres and styles of music, then suddenly I listen to them now, and it's phenomenally beautiful, and it makes you sort of feel emotions that other players and other music can't. And this is just, again, another level of that microtonality. And I'll share some examples shortly. I think melodically, it's a lot easier to sort of feel these feelings than harmonically. There is, again, caveated with I am not an expert in this stuff, but there is an inherent problem with the sort of 24 equal divisions of octave, in that the two octaves live, what's the word I'm looking for, like disharmoniously. So the harmonic overtone series of each of those notes clashes almost entirely all the way through. I think it's something like you have to get to like the 11th or 13th harmonic or something like that before they start to sort of marry up in any harmonic sense, which is why when you first hear quarter-tonal chords, or chords that make use of both of those sort of two octaves, if you like, two pianos, we can picture it that way, it's very, very uneasy, and it has an almost chorus or phasing-like effect. I think that's how we try to justify it the first time hearing it, where it's like, oh, the piano's out of tune, it sounds like an old broken pub piano. But actually that kind of chorus piano sound is also incredibly beautiful in its own way.
All right, well, let's hear something. Would you be up for even just giving us, well, you Do what you want, man.
Absolutely. Well, there's no, listeners, don't need to worry. This is not a death metal exercise. So I have here a fretless classical guitar. And again, I will get the pronunciation wrong, but the Turkish call it something like a perdesiz or perdesiz guitar. And that means basically guitar without frets. And it's a really popular instrument in Turkey. Now, most of the music in, again, that I've discovered in sort of traditional cultures, it's all about the melodic intervals between these notes, as opposed to sort of what's the word I'm looking for? So the music's very horizontal as opposed to vertical. If you're looking at the paper, let's put it that way. So often there'll be a drone note, so something like an A, and then over the top of that drone note, the music that I've been trying to study is sort of Turkish and Arabic music based on what's called makams. Let's imagine for ease that they're basically are scales. So we might take a standard A minor scale. And already with that little bit of sort of vibrato in both directions, up and down, you can hear some of that microtonality. But he is one of the most popular sort of Arabic or Turkish makams. So what that is that's a C approximately quarter flat. So the scale, let's just take the basic scale of A minor, would be A, B, C quarter flat, D, E, F, G, A. So that's a really basic sort of makam or scale. I'll just use the word scale. I also don't even know if it's pronounced makam. I don't speak any Arabic, unfortunately. But yeah, so that's a really basic scale that they'll use kind of a lot of over an A drone note. Just with that minor, we can compare it to the minor scale, but just with a quarter flat third. And it creates that really interesting sound. And I find that incredibly beautiful straight away, and that really, when you hear this with like a little splash of reverb and stuff, that really evokes that sound of that part of the world. But there are, I mean, I can play through hundreds of variations of these things. What I tried not to do was learn all of these scales and then just kind of like burn through them in a really disingenuous way. So I learned a few basic ones, and then I just thought, right, I'm going to try and just experiment with this stuff and see what I can find on my own, see what melodic sequences I can find on my own, and then go back and research it and find like, yeah, of course, the Turkish people have used this scale for 1,500 years or whatever. Like some bloke from Sunderland has not just, not just stumbled across this.
Okay, well that's exciting. So what, with your own exploration, do you... Right, because then you're not going, okay, well, in Turkey, usually it's the sixth note raised by this amount and etc. So then you're going, well, I can just do whatever I want, and I can. So have you then created your own little blocks of scale that you then work with that work for you?
Yeah, kind of. I've got like an own little, and it's something that I really need to get better at writing down, but I just have sort of an internal library of scales. And what I did was I started with just taking the basic modes, or before that, major and minor scales, and just going, right, what can I flatten and sharpen for both pleasing and quite unpleasant musical effect as well. And there's things you can do. So again, if we take the minor scale, and this time we just quarter flat the second, again, that turns out to be a very popular sort of one in that part of the world.
Yeah.
But because that second, or minor ninth, whatever you want to call it, isn't that important, let's say, sorry, just knocking that gain down a touch.
All right.
Isn't that important, And again, everything I say has a huge caveat of I do not know what I'm talking about. But because that second,
no one knows what they're talking about, man. It's all right. It's all right.
Or minor ninth has that much importance. You can get away with flattening or sharpening that degree of the scale quite easily, and it still sounds very musical. And it sounds, it's like taking a minor scale and just making it, how do we make it slightly sadder? And that's the kind of feeling that gives me. There's also an interesting one I found, which takes the major scale and, again, quarter flattening the third and also the sixth. So you'd have A, B, C quarter sharp, D, E, F quarter sharp, G quarter sharp on the way up, and then G on the way down. So I'll play that. So kind of somewhere a sort of microtonal hybrid Mixolydian-y kind of sound.
Really interesting.
And
it kind of go on. No,
I was going to say there's absolutely, there's tons of these sounds. I haven't invented any of them or discovered any of them. They've all been used before. I found I did get lazy in the end and found a big like a sort of wiki that was a list of all of these thousands of different maqams, because Arabic music as well is built very, very differently to ours, and I found it very challenging to find any real quality information in English as well, like I say, because so much of this for so long has been like an oral tradition. Not a lot of it is written down, and even less of it in English, but the music is based on really complex systems of these maqams playing in and out of each other, and even smaller fragments of music than that. So the maqams are sometimes based on 2 or 3, what I believe are called jins, which are 3, 4, 5 note sequences. And there are kind of rules about what directions you can use these maqams in, how you modulate between them. Of course, modern players have thrown out that handbook and do whatever they want to a large extent. But I think it's important for me to try and discover anyway, and try and learn some of this stuff and do it as authentically as I possibly can. I want this to be, I don't want this to be perceived as cultural appropriation, but more cultural appreciation. I guess I really, really enjoy these sounds, and I want to try and embed it into my music a little and into my psyche, and play some absolutely tiny part in exposing some new people, perhaps listening to this podcast, to this sound world.
Well, it sounds like you're doing that in the right way, especially when you're trying to understand those pieces of music and how they're built in that sort of non-Western way, like with Indian classical and understanding a rag and how that works. It's not a case of A to B. It's tertiary form, binary form. It's like, well, actually, in this section, we have these rules, and you can approach the scale in this way. And then in this section, you can now use 6 of the notes, but you have to do... It's kind of... they're just non-Western ideas, aren't they? And you have to sort of step out of, I don't know, come at it a different way, I guess, to sort of appreciate it. Do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. And I actually have a friend who went and studied in Indian classical music, and took up sitar. And he went out to India and really embedded himself in all aspects of the culture. And I think, I'm sure even he would say that it's really difficult to forget everything you've learned about music and what you think Indian music is, or what you think Turkish music is, or, Arabic music or Islamic prayer music, all that kind of stuff. And it's really hard to completely get rid of your preconceived notions about this and truly learn it from scratch. It's probably impossible, but all we can do is the best job that we can with the tools we've got, right? And I think the people I've not been blessed to meet and speak to many Arabic musicians or people exploring this kind of music as well, but the one or two that I have, think it's absolutely wild that some middle-aged white dude from Sunderland has somehow discovered their musical tradition and is trying to learn it. And they actually really, really appreciate that and have just didn't take any offence to it at all, that I was just completely ruining, tens of thousands of years of musical culture or whatever. I just thought it was cool that somehow I'd discovered this.
Yeah. Sorry, man.
Tunisian oud player, and he was like, "It's really cool that you're trying to do some of this. Like, don't stress about it."
Great, but that's got to apply to our ears, isn't it? And how we hear those notes. Do you think we'll ever sort of hear those intervals in the same way as someone who's been like really just brought up around hearing those intervals all the time? Like, because it sounds kind of exotic, doesn't it? Because Turkey, to me, is an exotic place. But for people who live in Turkey, I guess maybe it's not so exotic because it's Turkey, it's home, So, yeah, we can't ever kind of get rid of that either, I guess, can we?
Yeah, it's a really...
Not that that's a bad thing as well. Like, I think, that's just how it is, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you can get used to the notes and the music like anything. If you expose yourself enough to it and you do enough of it, then you can hear this stuff. And in fact, I find it really interesting. We hear this stuff pretty much every day of our lives, and certainly every summer. Next time you listen to an ice cream van go down the street, you will, because of the Doppler effect and the pitches stretching and contracting and compressing as the ice cream van is moving towards or away from you, you will hear quarter tones very audibly in the sort of music coming out from the ice cream van, caused by the the Doppler effect. But that's an audio segment to promote this podcast there, Adam.
Yeah.
Thank
you. That's beautiful.
Yeah,
okay, that's interesting.
I noticed this about 10 years ago or something. I was kind of walking down the street and heard the ice cream van, and I was like, I'm sure I've heard that cadence in some Vaishnagradsky music. And it was amazing, and it drives me wife mental because we can't go anywhere without hearing, I'll hear mad noises in nature and she'll be like, why are you like dancing in 11/8 to the sound of that river or whatever, Stop! It's not music. Stop listening to it. But yeah, so you'll hear it. I mean, for some reason, I don't know why. It's not the same with when police cars go past and the sirens. That's a very smooth kind of up and down pitch from the Doppler effect. Maybe it's just the certain notes or the speed of the ice cream van or whatever. But listen out next time. It'll not be long, hopefully, before the ice cream vans are here, and you'll hear pure quarter tonal and sort of microtonal movements between some of those notes for sure. So people hear this stuff all the time. You just don't realise.
So yeah, of course. Okay. So we hear all frequencies presented in this way, but there's a difference though, isn't there? In that sort of, we don't actively listen to, or we don't engage with it in the same way. Perhaps there's a very much a modern thing from disconnecting to listening to those sounds as well, which I mean is definitely a different podcast episode of which we got a couple, but that sort of in very recent history, even in the last 10 years, significantly shutting off from sounds around us in order just to get through the day. So what we become used to hearing is more, processed and, sort of hyper perfect, I suppose, isn't it? So, God knows what I'm even saying, but
and I think I know kind of what you're getting at. Like 99.9% of our lives is spent passive listening at the very best to the world around us or things that's going on. So although we hear all of these quarter tones and all of this microtonality in nature, in bird song and things like that all day, every day, we just don't notice it because our attentions are laser focused on, this tiny little black screen that I'm looking at now. Or everybody, including myself, is walking around with headphones on, listening to podcasts or music while we're walking the dog or something, when really we should be listening to the natural world around us. This is a very different podcast that we're getting onto now, I suppose, but something else that I'm really passionate about is just the sound of stuff. I just love the way that stuff sounds. It's a
finding beauty in the world around you, that is, isn't it? That's just noticing how magic the world is.
Absolutely, man. I mean, at 6 o'clock this morning, the bird call wasn't quite as magical as it is at 10 o'clock this morning. You want to go out and throttle them, but it's amazing. The world is just full of, we all use our eyes for a lot, but we tend to neglect our ears a lot. There's so much beauty in just the auditory world around us. Sorry, getting off topic a little bit there, man. But
no, let's do that. I like that. I'm excited by that. Do you think that's influenced your love for microtonal music?
I was trying to think about where this came from, because I knew this would be one of the questions you would ask us, and I can't really explain where it came from. I think as I started to become a reasonable guitar player, on electric, certainly not on this thing, I got really interested in, how can I make life really difficult for myself? And found, like you do with the stuff that you do, how can I take a violin bow, 3 pigeons, and make it all come together? How can I make life difficult? So I got really into, and still am into, like progressive rock and progressive metal and really kind of technical sort of music. And then it's almost as if, like, I certainly haven't completed that. Don't get us wrong. I'm like 1% on the way to my journey there. But then it was like, how can this be? There's got to be more to it. And I really don't know how I discovered microtonal music. I think I had a professor at college, music college perhaps, who knew that I was interested in the weird and wonderful sounds of progressive metal and all that kind of thing. And he showed me a book of graphic scores. And I think looking through that book, I started to hear things differently. And then actually seeing some of these pieces performed just on YouTube probably was the initial exposure to microtonal music. But I remember, I remember the thing that really made it gel for us was when I was at university, I studied a module called Mediterranean music, which is quite ridiculous in hindsight. But each week, the idea was that we'd have a 2-hour lecture, and we'd find all about the music of Turkey in that 2 hours. And then next week, it would be all about the music of Egypt. So it was a real whistle-stop tour around the Mediterranean. But I remember my teacher at the time put on this piece of music by, I think I probably sent you it, by an oud player. Again, I'll get his name wrong, and he's one of my favourite musicians, called Dafa Youssef, a Tunisian Sufi musician. And this piece of music was a real East meets West kind of vibe. He played the oud. There was Western, I think, drummer and piano player, and perhaps a sort of Arabic double bass player as well. And this was basically like progressive metal jazz played on traditional instruments with microtones and stuff in it. And I remember everybody else in the class being not too amused, and my jaw literally dropped. I was like, what is this? What on earth is this? And why have I not come across this before? And that's what really, I think, led us to follow this path a little bit and try and understand a little bit how some of this works melodically, at least, anyway. Because
you could see it, because it was linked to a graphic score, that particular piece from the oud player guy we're talking about.
This actually wasn't a graphic score, no. They were two separate stories that for some reason
sorry I mashed them together in my head.
You will have already learned that my brain isn't very linear, so it'll be like, right, talk about shiny subject. Ooh, shiny subject too. And so it probably doesn't make great. A very easy editing experience for you, so I apologise for that.
That's fine. We'll definitely leave this bit in. Yeah. So if we go back to the graphic score, though, what was that? It made sense that because you could then sort of, you saw, like an image, and you were like, oh, okay, well, that's what they're playing.
Yeah, it's a really weird and wonderful world, and I know you've explored it a little bit, and I have a book here called Notations 21, which I think is out of print, but my college teacher, Pete, recommended that I get hold of it. And it's graphic scores from the early stuff where it was almost like drawings on, music paper, to then sort of full paintings, to then just kind of geometry, like swirls and shapes. And the idea is that the conductor or the musician's performing, it's completely open to their interpretation, so the music sounds a little bit different every time. But I can only think that that's where I first came across this microtonal stuff, because, musicians will have been sliding up and down on kind of violins and cellos and stuff.
Okay.
And hearing that clash.
Because there were no Western harmonic rules, basically.
Exactly. It was, here's a picture, play some stuff. and that's you know that's what happened, and there's some really amazing stuff in that book and some really amazing sort of versions of those pieces that you can find on YouTube and stuff as well. And I think that's when I first started dabbling. It was around that time with this quarter-tonal, microtonal stuff. And the first thing I wrote was, I think it might still be on YouTube somewhere, was a very bad quarter-tonal piano piece that only used the quarter tones in the right hand and only used them kind of like as chromatic passing notes to get from one chord to the other. And it's funny, it sounds a little bit like Tom and Jerry music. It's kind of like frantic and it's a very comfortable way to start to listen to quarter tones, is to just use them as like chromatic passing notes. Again, sorry, went off topic a little bit there, but I think those two things happened around the same time. I was looking at the graphic scores and I was starting to experiment with trying to write some basic quarter-tonal, microtonal music.
So I think that's particularly interesting because that's the graphic scores being like a gateway drug, basically, to sort of musical and sonic freedom, because obviously notation is insane, or traditional Western notation is insanely restrictive for even where music can go, because it says, you know, what key signature, you know, this is where it is. Okay, for the whole piece, we can sort of say slightly later, but we certainly can't introduce quarter tones and the idea of. I'm always really fascinated in music education. There's always lots of talk about pitch, melody, harmony, these kind of things, but actually, going back a little bit to our conversation about noticing sounds around you, so much of modern music, be it metal or electronic or rock or whatever, is not so much about pitch and harmony. It's about quality of textures, impacts of sounds and productions, and kind of the way you perceive sound. And it feels like, notation is that doesn't explain any of that stuff. None of that could have happened if this was all being written down. So graphic scores are kind of like a gateway drug, aren't they, I suppose?
I mean, it's certainly, from what I remember, that's certainly the way it was for me. And that's really interesting point about modern music. And again, being primarily, first and foremost, a metal musician, I actually find, maybe it's just because I'm more exposed to other metal players than any other genre, really. But I find, and I had a few fretless guitar lessons from a phenomenal player in the States as well, and he was saying that people that are interested in exploring this stuff are like the progressive metal or the death metal musicians, those who were interested in just in sound and in texture, like you said. And I mean, a lot of modern, not a lot, that's not fair, some modern metal music is almost, I call it klangfarben metal. It's almost like pure rhythm sometimes. Like, it doesn't matter what the pitches are. This one goes doing, and this one goes bam, and this one goes brr, and it's just these textural noises. And like Schoenberg's klangfarben melody. We coined the term klangfarben metal, just color sound metal. And that's kind of what it is. It's making noises, some that are pleasant, some that are unpleasant, but they all serve the overall picture.
Okay. Yeah, so it's that degree of open-mindedness to what actually music is. Because what is music, especially now that you've started coming in, messing things up with your slicing notes up? It's just you. Because we could almost link those two stories beautifully that I accidentally put together, of you in your lecture being fascinated by that piece of music and no one else really sort of taking note of it. Do you think there was, and I'm not going to ask you to say, were you more open-minded than the rest of the people in your group, but do you think there was a bit of an open-minded sort of critical approach to listening to stuff from your perspective that made you able to enjoy that, whereas some others maybe were like, this is a bit weird, okay, let's move on. Interesting experience, but see you later.
I think what it probably was from memory, almost every other person in the class was from a traditional orchestral kind of classical music background. Because I studied music for some reason. I studied music quite academically, instead of practically. I did a lot of practical stuff at college, and then when I went to uni, I was like, I want to do something different. I want to somehow talk about music using words rather than notes. Let's try that for a bit. And it's a very kind of orchestral, traditional music sort of environment, the university I went to. Amazing university, great facilities, great teachers, don't get us wrong. But I think most of the other students in that group were violin players, were piano players, I remember there was a tuba player. There's always one poor kid who has to carry the tuba around.
So they were accessing music through notation, man.
Exactly. So they had learned very, very differently, whereas I couldn't read notation until I kind of got to college and had to do it. I was relying on guitar tab and just trying to listen to records and go, right, how do you get that berm sound? All right, it might be that note. So I came from a very, unacademic route into academia. So that's the only thing I can put it down to. There's also the fact that I was about 3 or 4 years older, because I'd already tried university somewhere else and it didn't quite work out. So transferred here. So I was 3 or 4 years older. So maybe I was just slightly less hungover than everybody else on the day. I don't know.
Mm. Our experiences sound bizarrely similar. So I went to university after going to university before, and yet had this strange feeling of sitting with all the younger students who were like, right, yeah, well, I'm not going to go to my lecture today. And I'm like, I'm going to be there, man, because this is far better than working at McDonald's that I was doing after I left the other university. So this is amazing. But yeah, also that being working with academic players, if you like, classic Western, classical, proper players, this is how you do it. I worked out music theory for myself. I had a sort of a mad, believing I was a genius kind of moment where I cracked the code. I remember my flat being like covered in pieces of paper, like writing down the scale and like seeing the pattern and oh my God, I've got it. I finally got it. And then, coming to terms with the fact that actually, no, it's the maths that explains it rather than but working it out. And that is such a different access to something. And it must, I just want to make it sound like being like, well, therefore we are the open-minded ones, but it's probably a good thing to remember that actually that's probably laid fertile ground to be open to listen to this stuff, hasn't it? It's got that, and maybe why this isn't so hugely popular in that way, because so many people have come from a more Western route, I suppose, or more traditional route.
Yeah, and I came to music very late, really. I didn't get my first musical instrument until I was 14 or 15, I think 14. So by that point, right, you're a bit rebellious and going through the goth phase or whatever, and already like questioning reality and everything around you and questioning the rules of the game. It's like, well, I'm going to play guitar. I'm going to be the best guitarist ever, but I'm not going to learn from books. I'm just going to hit strings with stuff and see what happens. So, I didn't have a musical education from, like some of these students may have. I didn't get to know that many of them personally, to be honest, but that some of them may have. They were phenomenal players, far better than I'll ever be, sure. But had probably been doing it from very, very young, from very, very early, which, so maybe they'd been brought up with a certain kind of set of standards. Maybe
indoctrinated with Western harmony.
Exactly. Either that, or maybe you just have to be a very, maybe there has to be something a little bit wrong with you to be a bloke from Sunderland who enjoys exploring this stuff, I don't know. I'm probably the problem as opposed to the solution, I would say.
Definitely the solution. Amazing. All right, I'd love to keep talking, but I think that was too much of a beautiful place to finish, to be honest. So yeah, thank you, man. A true pleasure.
No worries, my pleasure. Hopefully some people, got something from it. There is an increasing number of resources online exploring this stuff. I think it's important to see everything that we've talked about today is we haven't even scratched the surface with this stuff. And there are also other musical cultures and other ideas where it's not quarter tones and it's not 12 or 24 equal divisions of the octave. Some have 19, some have 31. And that's where things get really bizarre, because suddenly traditional Western ideas of harmony in music completely break down, because there's no major third or whatever that even exists in that sort of tuning system. So definitely go and explore some of this stuff. Find players who are way better than me and can talk about this more authentically, and just have fun with it, That'd be my final piece of advice. Don't do what I do and try to worry too much about about if it's inappropriate or whatever to try and do some of this stuff, and just have fun with it, man.
Well, this is why you've been the perfect guest, because you're someone who uses it and loves it and is interested by it, and there's no better people to educate and teach than people who are actively doing it and love it and come at it from a sort of a humble and authentic perspective. So perfect. Thank you.
My pleasure. What we haven't done, which might be an interesting discussion for the future, is actually talk about and share some kind of like harmonic examples, how some of these I can get the double fretted guitar, the sort of 44 fretted guitar out, and maybe show some examples of
You could do that if you can squeeze that in now. You could do that if you want, or is it too long-winded, do you think?
I can probably do a little bit of it on the fretless. It works a bit better on the fretted one, but I can do a little bit of it on the fretless if it's useful.
Yeah, just cool, man. Yeah.
So there was funnily enough, actually, just last night I was just out walking the dog, and it's really foggy here, and we're close to a foghorn. And I found that the foghorn was almost a perfect E, which was so fortunate. So I just started like kind of noodling around. And I've also worked out through experimentation, and I will shut up and just play in a minute, through experimentation, that a lot of chords don't particularly work well on the fretless, but where you can really get away with quarter tonal intervals in chords is where you would normally use like the 5 or the dominant chord, because there's a lot of kind of inherent tension anyway, and you can get away with doing an awful lot as long as you sort of resolve back to the 1 or whatever. So anyway, I came up with a little idea. I'll try, my hands are freezing, so I'll try and sound like I can half play. So that chord is like
beautiful.
like an A dominant 7th, but you can get away with.
That was inspired by a foghorn.
By foghorn, yeah.
I mean, that's the most self-deprecating setup to something that was insanely beautiful, even though I'm hearing it through Zoom, which is currently cutting out the audio in between as well, and it still sounds great. So
it probably sounds better with that digital tremolo effect on than it does in real life. The basic sort of like E minor chord, but then down to this sort of A dominant 7, but with the C sharp, that major third, just quarter flattened, so it'd be like a C quarter sharp. So you have your A, E, G, and C quarter sharp.
Okay.
And then when you're playing melodically, I also found that again with the 6th kind of quarter flattening the F sharp. But there's in Vaishnagradsky's book, I think it's impossible to get hold of, but there's PDFs and stuff and websites of it online. But his book goes through and breaks down all of these kind of like chords in detail, and it's a bit of like a kind of scale and chord dictionary, if you like. And he also talks about some cadences and stuff that works. But you can have really interesting chords like, it's really difficult on the fretless actually, but so you normally have like a C major chord. Could quarter flat that E. Get right down to a C minor. And then further flatten that E. So you have kind of like a sub minor chord. So you'd have C, E, 3 quarter flat, G. and things like that. And he expands on all of these different movements, all of these different chords. You can have like a quarter sharp third with a quarter flat seventh, and find these really beautiful, harmonically quite disturbing chords. But then he's managed to use them really musically in some of his music that I sent you. Yeah, I'm going to shut up because the more I play, the worse I'm making it sound. So
no. I like the sub C minor thing. That's cool. Really nice. It's not too scary.
I think if you go away and play, and you can do some of this stuff by just sort of like quarter bending a string on a fretted guitar as well, right? But if you go away for 10 minutes away from this conversation and just play your normal tuning and normal chords, and then try to play that chord, it'll suddenly sound really disturbing again. I think because we've talked about it, which is what I find almost every morning when I pick this guitar up or whatever. I always find like, it's a little bit spicy the first few times you hear the notes while you sort of retune yourself to it. But we've been immersed in this world now for the last hour or so. So it's, if you now go away from it for an hour and then come back, it might be a little bit disturbing, like all over again, which is part of the beauty.
Get to recalibrate. Wow, man. Thank you.
No, my pleasure. Hopefully some of that was not total nonsense, and hopefully some of it was useful.
All of it. Very useful.